The observation deck of the Meridian Gate space station hummed with the quiet efficiency of 100 different species coexisting in carefully negotiated proximity. Anna pressed her scaled palm against the transparisteel viewport, watching the swirl of the Andromeda Nebula paint the darkness in shades of violet and copper. Her reflection stared back at her, the bioluminescent markings along her cheekbones dimmed to almost nothing. She was Velkari, one of the last of her kind. The war had seen to that. Most species gave the Velkari a wide berth these days. It didn't matter that Anna had been a juvenile when her people's fleet had decimated the human colonies at Tau Ceti. It didn't matter that she had spent the last decade working as a xenobiologist, trying to repair what her ancestors had broken. When people looked at her, they saw the enemy. They saw the species that had glassed 3 worlds before the Alliance finally brought them to heel. So Anna had learned to make herself small. She took the shifts no one else wanted, kept to the abandoned corners of the station, and never, ever expected kindness. The observation deck was her sanctuary because most beings avoided it during Gamma Cycle, when the radiation from the nearby pulsar made the shields flicker with an unsettling strobe effect. Anna didn't mind. Her species had evolved on a world bathed in hard radiation. What kept others away drew her like a homecoming. She settled onto one of the curved benches that ringed the viewport, pulling her equipment case close. Inside were the samples she'd collected from the hydroponics bay, crystalline fungi that somehow thrived in the zero-gravity sections. If she could isolate the genetic sequence that allowed them to grow without directional gravity, it might revolutionize food production on deep space vessels. Not that anyone would credit a Velkari with the discovery. Anna was so absorbed in her work, carefully pipetting the luminescent spore culture into analysis vials, that she didn't notice the human until he sat down beside her. Not across from her, not at the next bench over. Right beside her, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of coffee and machine oil on his clothes. Anna's hands froze. Her bioluminescent markings flared bright amber, an involuntary stress response she'd never quite learned to control. Humans didn't sit next to Velkari. They crossed corridors to avoid them. They requested different laboratory shifts. They certainly didn't choose to share a bench when the entire observation deck was empty. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the human said, his voice warm and conversational. He was looking out at the nebula, his eyes reflecting the swirling colors. "I've been on this station for 3 years and I never get tired of this view." Anna's vocal cords felt paralyzed. She managed a slight nod, her markings still blazing with anxiety. The human turned to face her, and Anna braced herself for what would come next. The recognition, the disgust, the sudden remembrance that he was sitting next to one of the monsters who had killed millions of his people. But his expression remained open, interested. He extended a hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I'm Lewis, Engineering Division. You're Dr. Reeves, right? From Xenobiology." She stared at his hand. No one called her doctor. Most people just used her station designation, XB7. Slowly, uncertainly, she placed her scaled hand in his. His skin was warm, surprisingly soft compared to her armored hide. "Anna," she managed, her voice a rough whisper. "Just Anna." "Anna," Lewis repeated, as if tasting the name. He smiled, and it reached his eyes. "I've been hopping to run into you, actually. I read your paper on vacuum-resistant cellular structures. Brilliant work. The way you mapped the protein folding sequences could revolutionize hull design." Anna's markings flickered from amber to a confused blue-green. "You read my paper?" "Of course. It was published in the Journal of Astrobiology, wasn't it? About 8 months ago." Lewis settled more comfortably on the bench, genuinely enthusiastic. "I'm working on a new hull composite that needs to withstand both hard radiation and micrometeorite impacts. Your research on how crystallum fungi rebuild their cell walls after puncture damage, that's exactly the kind of self-healing mechanism I've been trying to engineer." He was talking to her about her work, not as a curiosity, not with the patronizing tone of someone making a political statement about species equality. He was talking to her like she was a colleague, like she mattered. Anna's voice caught. I didn't think anyone read it. Lewis looked genuinely surprised. Are you kidding? It's been cited in at least a dozen engineering journals. You're doing groundbreaking work, Anna. Something cracked open in her chest, a terrible, fragile hope she'd thought she'd killed years ago. Most people don't. She gestured vaguely at herself, at her scales, at the bioluminescent patterns that marked her as Velkari. They don't usually want to acknowledge Velkari research. Lewis was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. I lost my sister at Tau Ceti, he said finally. Anna felt her heart sink. There it was, the moment when everything would shatter. She was a terraforming engineer on the second colony, Lewis continued. His voice was steady, but she could hear the old pain beneath it. Sarah, she was 26. She'd just gotten engaged. I'm sorry, Anna whispered. It was inadequate, those two small words against the weight of such loss, but it was all she had. I was angry for a long time, Lewis said. He was still looking out at the nebula, his profile silhouetted against the cosmic light show. I hated the Velkari, all of you. It was easier than dealing with the grief. Anna waited, her markings dimmed to nearly black, preparing herself for the rejection that must be coming. But then I actually met some of you, Lewis said, and I realized that you're people, just people, some good, some bad, most somewhere in between, just like humans, just like every species in the Alliance. He turned to look at her directly. The Velkari who destroyed the colonies, they're gone, dead or imprisoned or exiled. You weren't one of them, Anna, you were a child. I still carry their legacy, she said bitterly, their guilt. No, Lewis said firmly. You carry your own legacy, and from what I've seen, it's a legacy of trying to build instead of destroy. That takes courage, especially when people like me make it harder than it needs to be. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small data chip. I was actually hopping to ask you something. The engineering division is developing a new generation of biological air recyclers for long-range exploration vessels. We need someone with expertise in extremophile organisms. The pay is good, the work is fascinating, and he grinned. I'd really like to work with you. Anna stared at the data chip like it was a quantum anomaly. You want me to join your team? If you're interested, no pressure. I know xenobiology keeps you busy. Lewis placed the chip gently on the bench between them. But I think we could do something incredible together. Your understanding of adaptive biology, my engineering experience, we could design systems that save lives, a lot of lives. Tears were forming in Anna's eyes, a physiological response the Velkari shared with humans. She blinked them back furiously. Why? She asked. Why would you do this? Lewis was quiet for a moment. Because Sarah would have wanted me to, he said finally. She believed in judging people by their actions, not their ancestry. She would have loved your research. She probably would have dragged you to lunch and talked your ear off about symbiotic ecosystems. He stood up, giving her space, respecting her need to process. Think about it. The project outline is on the chip. We start preliminary work next month, but there's no rush. He paused, then added with a gentle smile, and Anna, you belong here. On this station in the scientific community at the table where decisions are made. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, not even yourself. As Lewis walked away, Anna sat alone on the bench, her markings slowly shifting through the full spectrum of Velkari emotion. Amber to blue to violet to a warm, golden yellow she hadn't felt in years. Hoping. She picked up the data chip with trembling fingers and held it up to the light of the nebula. Such a small thing, just a few grams of crystalline storage medium, but it felt like it weighed as much as a star. For years, Anna had believed she had to earn the right to exist in spaces dominated by other species. She had to work twice as hard, be twice as quiet, take up half as much room. She had to somehow atone for crimes she never committed, carry guilt for a war she never fought. but Lewis had sat next to her like she was royalty. Not because he was making a political statement, not because he was trying to prove something, but because he saw her work, respected her mind, and believed she had value. It was such a simple thing, really. Sitting next to someone, treating them with dignity, believing in their potential. But for Anna, who had spent so long believing she was unloved and unwelcome, it was revolutionary. She carefully packed away her fungal samples, handling them with renewed purpose. Tomorrow, she would review the project outline on Lewis's data chip. She would probably accept his offer, not because she thought she could ever fully escape the shadow of her species' history, but because Lewis had shown her something important. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a better future, one moment of connection at a time. Anna stood and walked to the viewport, pressing both palms against the transparent steel. Her reflection stared back at her, but this time her markings were glowing bright yellow gold. The color of joy, the color of belonging. Behind her, the observation deck remained empty, but Anna no longer felt alone. Somewhere on this station, a human engineer had lost his sister to Anna's people. And instead of letting that loss turn him into something bitter and small, he had chosen to honor her memory by building bridges. Anna would honor Sarah's memory too, she decided, by accepting Lewis's offer, by doing the work, by proving that the Velkari could be more than their worst chapter. She thought of Lewis's smile, genuine and warm. She thought of how he'd called her doctor, acknowledging not just her work but her worth. She thought of how he'd sat beside her without hesitation, as if she were someone whose company was desirable. As if she were royalty. No one had ever made her feel that way before. Anna tucked the data chip carefully into her equipment case and headed toward her quarters. She had work to do, a future to build, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she actually believed she deserved to be part of it. The nebula swirled on behind her, painting the cosmos in impossible colors, a reminder that even in the vast darkness of space, there was always light. And sometimes, that light came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes, it came from a human engineer who chose to sit beside a Velkari scientist and treat her like she mattered. Because in the end, that's all anyone really needs, to matter to someone, to be seen, valued, and welcomed. Anna had thought she was unloved, but Lewis had shown her differently. And that made all the difference.